The best thing the Jacksonville Jaguars new staff can do is be honest in self-evaluation. I'll tell you why that's so important moving forward on this edition of Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is your team every day here on Locked On Jaguars. We thank you for making us your first listen. I'm Tony Wiggins, the host of the Locked On Jaguars podcast that you can find wherever you get your podcasts. All you got to do is just tap in each and every day, whether you watch them or listen to them. I can promise you I will be wherever you need me to be so you can stay caught up on the latest of your Jacksonville Jaguars. Here's the show today. At the end of the day, we're going to talk about you can't change it all at once. I know we want to, but that's really not the way it works. Even if it did work that way and you think you could change everything all at once, that probably does mean you won't win a thing. We'll talk about that. Right in the middle of the show, you got to feel the team. I know I'm sitting here saying, man, they need to replace a lot of stuff and they're going to make a whole bunch of hard choices and evaluations, but you still also have to be able to put 53 on that field next year so you can compete. Talk about how difficult that is. It's difficult because where we're going to start at is about self-evaluation. Self-evaluation is extremely important in this situation. They ain't got no reason to lie to themselves because they didn't pick not one person so far that's on this roster. That won't start for this regime until they actually start procuring talent in free agency. That will be James Gladstone, Tony Boselli, as well as Liam Cohen. That's the GM, the EVP, and the head coach in their alignment, the word that we love to use so much, right? But they're also, I believe, because they're a coach-centric team, they're really, really going to lean on the evaluations of not just mainly the coaches, more so than the staff, because probably they're evaluating those guys in the scouting department, and then you'll see changes made after the draft. That's the way it always is. When a new GM comes in, he does not ship off everybody because most of the people that he is probably going to hire, most of those people would still be under contract with other teams. Scouting contracts are different from coaching contracts and player contracts because the scouts actually work through the draft. So you can't just run everybody out of the building and then you don't have people there to prepare reports. And then the folks that you're going to hire, they won't be able to come in until after their tenure ends with the teams that they're on. Therefore, you have to keep those guys on board. And I'm sure some of those dudes are doing the best job that they can to impress James Gladstone and Tony Boselli. And, you know, in those careers, a lot of those people know each other anyway. But self-evaluation is important for a lot of reasons because there is no reason to not be absolutely 100% totally honest with yourself. They are probably looking at the film, scouring the tape, going on also their thought process when it comes to a lot of these players that they have scouted against. They're also using whatever they thought of those players when those players came out of college. And in the case of Liam Cohen, he might even know a whole bunch of those people from his two stints at Kentucky where he was playing and coaching in the Southeastern Conference. I know he knows Trayvon Walker because the game that he was coaching in, Trayvon Walker had a monster game against Kentucky. So I already know what his feelings is or what his feelings are on him. I think they're probably pretty high. But what does he think about Luke Fortner, a kid that he coached at Kentucky? What does he really, really, really think about Luke Fortner, who was his center when he was guiding the offense? Are there some things that showed up on the film that he knew from college? Was he one of the people that vouched for Luke Fortner when it came to the scouts? And then he feels like Luke Fortner did not get the benefit of the greatest coaching in the world to fit what he needs to do. I think those are the things that you have to consider. I also believe that when he looks at the rest of the team, there may be some guys that got contract extensions or who were signed as recently as last year that he has to keep, even though he knows or doesn't believe that those guys may be good enough to help this team get to a championship. So there's a little bit of a dilemma when it comes to that. And then you go out and talk about adding players, right? The part of this that makes it really hard about adding players is, what if you really see a guy you like, but you got one of those dudes that you have to keep and they're kind of in his way? You can't trade him. You can't just take dead money on from a whole bunch of guys. And it just, for the sake of this discussion, I'm talking about guys like Darnell Savage, Evan Ingram, who's banged up, Christian Kirk, Walker Little. I'm talking about a lot of Eric Armstead. I'm talking about a lot of people that a lot of the people in the fan base don't believe that those guys should be a big part of the team, but they're making a big part of the team's money. So therefore, this staff has to really make decisions. Do we replace them? Do we try to build around them? Do we try to coach them up and get them? Can we find something that they do that we can really, really use and put them in a different situation? I do not envy them at all. Now, I'm not sitting there saying that they're not having fun. I'm not going to sit here and say that they're going to run from the situation in some sort of way. I'm not going to tell you that they may think, oh, those are problems. We don't mind those problems. We all got hired. We just all got life-changing contracts ourselves. We have time. They think differently than fans and differently than media. Unfortunately for them, while they may have the wherewithal to have the outlook for 2 or 3 years down the line, a lot of judgment is going to come in about this staff, especially because of their perceived inexperience. A lot of judgment is going to come in. I wouldn't even say after year one. I'd say halfway through the season. If this record isn't what the excitement and the enthusiasm suggested it should be, and to be quite honest, the record never reflects that unless a team just flat out starts winning a whole bunch of games real fast. Then you're going to see a whole bunch of people turn into people that I call, the armchair people, and I'm one of them, that may start looking at this whole thing through the side eye. Now, I know y'all can't imagine that would happen right now because everyone's flying high. They're flying sky high because of all the changes that were made. This is a hard thing that they have to do. They want to make sure that they get this right. I'll give you my impressions on what I believe has to happen. We'll do that and more here in just a second on today's episode of Locked On Jaguars. All right, today's show is sponsored and brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment in the game exciting, whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three. I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantaneously, like T.I. would say. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Rolling along here as we are in post-combine mode, pre-free agency mode. In today's show, I mentioned a lot of names yesterday, and I got a lot of interaction. I talked, too, about the possibility of substantiating the rumors that the Jags were interested in Carlton Davis, the cornerback, the free agent cornerback out of from the Detroit Lions, and what it would mean and how it would shift things around. I think people really love that, right? So I took a chance not to do all of that today because this is kind of like season 2 of The Wire. I don't know if y'all saw it. It moved a little slow compared to season 1, but it was probably one of the most important seasons of that show. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. Everybody always talks about it, though. when people look at it in retrospect, they say, man, that was one of the most important seasons, even though it kind of moved slow until the very end of the year. This is what this is. Before we keep talking about these names, before I just keep throwing out information, before I keep just putting that bait on that hook and getting engagement and making people temporarily happy while not making them smarter, this is one of those shows where I got to give the bolts and nuts and I got to show you how the sausage is made a little bit. And I know that's not always sexy, but if you're a Jaguar fan and you're a fan of this team and you need to know all those little idiosyncrasies, all of those things. Did I say that right? Idiosyncrasies. I know my boy is going to kill me if I mispronounce that word, but you need to know all of the little things, right? Of what goes into this. And granted, I'm not in a building, so I don't know. I may be making a little bit of a mountain out of a molehill, but I can only imagine the excitement of trying to build this roster, get the best possible players that you absolutely can to help your franchise. But then you look down and maybe what's available doesn't line up with what you need. Analogy time, right? You know what you want to cook. You go to the grocery store, and all of a sudden this week beef is priced really, really high. You know that happens every now and then, right? You think you want to cook one thing, and you go and you got to send that text to your wife saying, we need to switch it up. I'm going to make something else because I ain't paying this much for this meat. That's the way that this might work a little bit. There's what you want to do and then what's available, especially once you go to the combine, you get the measurables, you do your interviews, you do your pro days. And I know a lot of people think that always lines up. Now, when you're picking number 5, usually that's not a big deal, because at 5, you're going to probably get, if not the best player at their position, you'll probably be able to get at least the 5th best player on your board. That's just usually the way it works. If you don't get the 5th best player, you move back a little bit. That's when you have to make a decision. Is it worth getting more bites at the apple, or is it worth just grabbing a dude right now that we know is number 5? So on a lot of boards, that guy is Ted McMillan. I have continuously saw that over and over again. There you go. I just mentioned a player for all of the people that get really happy when I mention an individual player. For a lot of people, it's Will Campbell. The odd thing about the Will Campbell pick is this. They say, well, he can play guard. There are some people that think he is a guard. There are other people that think, well, eventually he'll be the tackle, but you start him out at guard because you just want to get your 5 best guys on the field. So we can stop right there. That is inherently telling me that y'all believe either Walker Little or Anton Harrison is not the answer, because there's no way you'd be sitting here trying to replace a 24-year-old and a 25-year-old or a 26-year-old or however old Walker Little is. There's no way you'd be sitting there trying to replace them, especially when one guy's on a rookie deal as a first-round pick and the other guy just got an extension that's about to start this season. Why on earth would you be trying to sit here and get rid of those dudes, right? If you did not think that they were an issue. And then they say, well, draft Will Campbell. I think if you draft Will Campbell, if you believe he's a tackle, I don't think that makes him the best guard in the draft. I really don't. I actually think, to be honest, I think Kelvin Banks would be a better guard than Will Campbell will. I think there are other guys that you could. If you're really going to take the best offensive lineman in the draft, would it be the Mimbu kid out of Missouri? To be honest with you, I've seen people putting him in the top 5. So I know offensive line is the priority. They have discussed it. They have talked about it. Hell, I've been banging on the table for 5 years about the offensive line. So I'm not saying to not take an offensive lineman up high. What I am saying is make sure you have a plan. Make sure you do understand that the dude that you're picking at 5, if you don't move, he needs to be on this team for at least a decade. That's the way I look at it. He needs to be on this team and be more than serviceable for an entire decade. In fact, I'll say that he needs to probably go 3 or 4 Pro Bowls at least, and maybe even make All Pro twice. That's the goal. You want to get a guy like that. But it comes with honest self-evaluation. What if that doesn't line up with exactly what you need to win right now? Ted McMillan, we talked about him. How do they really feel about Gabe Davis and Christian Kirk? I know how y'all feel about him. There's some thought that they need to move down, and if they move down, they are in Tyler Warren territory. How do they really feel about Evan Ingram and Brenton Strange? Feel good enough that you can just bypass Tyler Warren if you think he's that good, if you move back down to 12 or 13? That's a great question. What about the rest of the positions? Are they just one offensive lineman away from winning? Can you upgrade Anton Harrison? Can you upgrade Walker Little? And in doing so, what does that mean for the money and the resources that have already been used, even though you're not the one that did it? And how do you work around it? All of these things are super, super important when you're talking about free agency and the draft. The difference is in free agency, you know, if you go out and get Carlton Davis, the reason why you're paying him because you know exactly what he's going to do from the day that he gets here. And the Jaguars, remember, they are now a team that have really, really talked about getting people that do certain things that they need done and bring that person in here and just allow that person to blossom, almost like putting them in a greenhouse at the right temperature to blossom. And all they have to do is be themselves, right? So if you're asking Will Campbell, who's a left tackle, to come in here and be something else, you can argue that that's not what you're doing when you do that, right? You're asking him to do something that he really hasn't done very often, that you're projecting that he can do. So that's almost counterintuitive to the point that the Jaguars have been making about who they are and what they're going to be and what they're going to do. I think if they're going to take a guard, they're probably going to take a dude that's been a guard for a long time. I don't think you have to take Will Campbell and make him a guard and hope in 2 years you turn him into your left tackle. I think if you want a guard, then in round 2, you just go and take a guard. Or in round 3, you take a guard. And James Gladstone has been a part of teams that have really made a living out of drafting guys late. Remember, they got Steve Avila a couple of years ago, I think in the second or third round in LA. You don't think they trade their second round pick right now for Steve Avila? You damn right they would, right? Hell yeah, they trade. If you give them Steve Avila right now, they might do a pick swap with the Rams from 5 to 22 if the Rams threw something else in. I'm telling you, this is how they think. They said, no, man, we believe. So this is not about them saying we can find a guy. This is about them saying traditionally we have been able to find people that, because other people have made mistakes with their philosophy, that can really, really help us because we're specifically looking for guys to do specific things with the way that we play football. It is not easy because there's a balance between fielding a team next year that you know can win some games, and winning next year isn't just about winning the PR. Winning next year is about winning comes in steps. So you win next year, you expect it the year after that to go a little bit further. Winning puts it in your deal. Unless you're the Jaguars in 2021, then you do all right, and then you come back and you get the same result. You see why having the 9-8 record doesn't feel the same when the expectations go up? Because they went 9-8 or 10-9 after the playoffs. There was expected that it was expected they take a next step. They didn't take a next step. In fact, they kind of remained the same, but it felt differently. The record was the same, but they didn't go to the playoffs, and it felt like they failed. And then last year, you saw what happened, and everybody got fired and run out of here. So it's about building that momentum. It's about making sure you take that step before you can take the next step. And learning how to win is a part of the DNA of a team that just doesn't go away. Sometimes you don't win right away. And when you don't win right away, it's about taking those baby steps. So they got to find the balance between fielding the most competitive team they can next year, but also doing the right thing for the future of this franchise. They can't change it all at once, but we'll try and we'll figure it out. We'll do it together. I'll tell you where the draft is strong. And does that mean that the Jaguars will attack those areas for the football team? Because you can't manufacture players at positions and then think that they're going to help you because of need. You have to take what is available to you at the time. So let's discuss that here in segment 3 on Locked On Jaguars. All right, how do the Jaguars manage to get the players that they need that can do two things? Field a team that is extremely competitive next year and make the kind of sound decisions that really help you not only just next year, but in the future. And that could mean contractually, that could mean what you have in free agency, that could mean the allocation of certain funds and monies. It could mean a whole bunch of things. There are a lot of people that want a third edge rusher, right? Trayvon's going to get paid 9 times out of 10 after this year. If they don't do it after this year, they'll let him play through the 5th-year option, and then they'll do it then. But sometimes in the next 2 years, Trayvon Walker's going to get a bunch of money to match up with the fact that Josh Allen is already getting a bunch of money. So how do you then go out and get a third edge rusher and fortify your pass rush the way, say, Dallas has? Dallas it seems like they always keep dudes, man, that know how to rush the passer. They're a little soft in the middle, but Dallas keeps them some sort of tweener defensive ends, right? They had guys go to free agency last year, and Dante Fowler and the other kid that went to Washington, and now they got 2 more guys, and that's not to mention DeMarcus Lawrence and or Michael Parsons, who they also use. So it always seems like, just like back in the day, the Dallas Cowboys had a whole bunch of offensive linemen. It always seems like they have pass rushers. So that's a team, in my opinion, that is very, very confident in their ability to locate, develop, onboard pass rushers that you pick later in the draft. The Philadelphia Eagles have done the same thing. They've attacked their defensive line early and in the mid rounds and late, and they've hit on just about everybody. So what this tells you is there's no real one formula to skin a cat. You have, I can't say that because Peter's going to beat me up. It's just a figure of speech, but there's no real formula that is one way to do everything, right? So teams seem to do things a different way. I think the Jaguars have a crew of people over there that are smart enough that they make the subtle adjustments. Remember, you can think that you have to fill all your squares, or you can think that you can just get the best players you absolutely possibly can each and every year and then figure it out once you get them in. There's a little bit of truth to both of it. I think finding a balance of how to do both is going to be what's key to the Jaguars getting it done. So I look for immediate impact players in free agency. That's one thing I look for, whether it's at corner, whether it's at third edge rusher. Offensive line, I definitely think guard or center, they should go out and get a surefire dude in free agency because it's going to come before the draft. And if you don't do it, and then the guy that you don't want, the guy that you want gets picked by somebody else because somebody's thinking just like you in the draft, now you're stuck with nothing. So they have to address the critical areas in free agency. I think they got to at least find one interior offensive line starter in free agency, possibly 2. If they do that, I think they still fortify the offensive line later on in free agency with some mid-round picks, with guys that can fit what they need to do. What I've said the whole time about the line is this. If you don't attack it to the point where you get 3 new starters, and they very well might not do that because you can't fix everything in 1 year, at least get 2 starters. Get 2 starters and then get 2 people that have the framework and that need a little bit of development that can replace some of the dudes you have right now. Foster, for instance, and maybe Van Lanen and guys like that on the back end. So all of these things are things that I want everyone to think about. I think you get instant impact players instead of this smorgasbord of guys that you're going to get. There's things that you can do. Instant impact at certain positions. You understand exactly what they are. And even in free agency, right? I keep telling people, like, if you were a team that really, really needed a left tackle, and I don't know how the Jaguars feel about Walker Little, right? I even heard a suggestion this morning on radio that somebody says, trade him. Trade Walker Little and see what you can get. If that's an option, fine, but then you might see Will Campbell taking it at number 5, right? Or Kelvin Banks or whoever they decide to take, or Mimbo or whoever they decide to take, right? Maybe they move Anton Harrison. Maybe they trade him off and say, you know what, we don't think we can win with him. What we're going to do, form a first-round pick. Guy has 3 years left, 2 years left on a rookie deal with a 5th-year option. Will the Chiefs decide to give us a second-round pick for Anton Harrison because they're desperate at left tackle and at least he's played some games and maybe they feel like they can move him from right to left? I don't know what they're thinking is, and I think we'll start to see that here real soon. But instant impact players in free agency, players that have been in development that you trust and know, like maybe, like watch this, Isaiah McDuffie, linebacker at Green Bay, played at Boston College, has played for Anthony Campanile a lot, right? Even won a starting job in Green Bay last year while probably making less than $2 million. what do you do with a guy like that who's a free agent? But then you got Devin Lloyd, you got, of course, Foy is your leader, and you got Muma, and then you got Ventrell Miller. Okay, you need 5 linebackers. Do you bring that guy in knowing that you got 2 of those dudes that are going to be free agents next year? I think Ventrell Miller's probably a free agent too because he wasn't a day or a 1-2 pick. So you got 3 guys that might be gone. Do you already say, look, I know that dude, I trust him, I'm going to bring him in here, and then shock the whole world that they went out and signed a linebacker even if it only cost them a couple of $1 million a year? Do you really get brave and go, you know what, Zach Bond was one of the best players in the league last year on defense. Let's just go get him, man. We know what he is. We don't know what these other guys are. Let him compete. Let him bring up the rear, and then we'll let him go in free agents next year. Or if Foy gets hurt or Foy doesn't, or he starts to slide, we decide which one of those guys we're going to keep to run with Zach Bond. See, this is what happens. What happens is what is available doesn't necessarily add up to what you need. But if what is available is better than what you have, then as a new staff, they are not locked in to not going out and getting the best players that they can. So don't be shocked and surprised. Don't be shocked and surprised if you see folks that don't seem to match up with need, but they actually make the team better than if they kept the other guy. Also, don't be shocked if they decide, no, that's good enough for us to work with. We need to hit these other positions really, really hard because we really need to change the offensive line. Because the reason why I'm doing this too is because a lot of people are sitting thinking that you just add 2 guys on the offensive line and we'll be good to go. And for them to emphasize that, and for the private conversations that I've had with EVP Tony Boselli over the years, very, very informal discussions, not an interview, just 2 guys talking. I know how they feel, at least Tony, about the offensive line. Tony Boselli probably felt more fired up about that offensive line when I talked to him than I have when I have talked to you guys about it. And he played the position. All right. And in their heyday, even though they had Fred and Jimmy and Brunell and Keenan McCardell and Mojo D, one of the things that the Jaguars had in the Coughlin in the early era of Jack Del Rio, they had people who could move you, and they were deep on the offensive line. They had 7, 8 dudes on that offensive line under Coughlin. So that was a really, really integral, important part of this team, and Boselli had a front row seat, right? The Chiefs, they got like all pro, and Pro Bowl caliber franchise guy in the middle of the line. And then they got another $20 million guy on the outside, Juwan Taylor, who we all know him very well. And their line was their weakness this year because they all have to be in lockstep. So if you tell me the Jaguars are adding 2 players to their line, I'll say, okay, what 2 or 3 players are better than Tooney, Humphreys, and Trey Smith? They need to fix it, and they got 3 dudes that anybody would make starters in this entire league. This is why I think this is so important. You got to really, really, really hope that you're in line with the Jaguars' evaluation of their own team before you can really put this together. But we're going to have fun trying to do it anyway. But please be careful. Don't be surprised if you see them sign players that are at positions that you did not believe was a priority, because remember, it's players over plays. All right, that's my play for today here on Locked On Jaguars. You guys take care. Make sure you tap in to Locked On NFL twice a day. Tyler rolling early in the morning like a double shot of espresso. And then me, Tony Wiggins, right here sliding through in the middle of the day with the barbershop. Both of those can be found on Locked On NFL wherever you get your podcast. And, of course, Locked On Jaguars will be here every single day going over draft and free agency with you. Until next time, y'all take care. We'll see you later.